Hi. A Russian gangster oligarch was once asked how he negotiates. It's simple, he said. You and the other party shake hands and sit down facing each other. Then you smile, take out your gun, and cock it and put it on the table. Then you look at the clock, only once. Finally, you smile again and start negotiating, never looking at either the gun or the clock, until you get to your final offer. In other words, if there's no credible threat and no deadline, you rarely get a good deal. And most important, with a gun on the table, you can afford to stay polite. It is far more effective than shouting or ranting. Now, why do I mention all this? Because finally in Canada, there are all the conditions for a new deal between the federal government and the provinces. And why does it matter to your investing? Because in the coming commodities boom, this would finally enable the Western provinces to get the federal government off their back and develop the landlocked oil and gas and metals that they have and other resources. And what's more, it would also enable them and shareholders of resource companies to keep more of the profit rather than let the feds take it. So this, in my opinion, would create a boom in Canadian resource stocks, which I suggest you should start sleuthing, although it may be a bit too early. But wait, you say, what threat today would cause this unlocking of value? In a word, the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, equivalent to a US state governor. The province of Alberta, also known as the Canadian Texas, produces lots of oil and gas whose revenues the federal government always tries to take over for its own purposes by one pretext or another. Until last month, that is. Last month, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said, no more. Then she told the federal government, politely, that she wants her share of the Canadian Pension Fund, which is a huge chunk of money and investments managed by the federal government. This demand, in my opinion, is a game changer of enormous proportions. And just to make sure you see the enormity of it, let me give you an analogy. Assume Canada is a large family farm run by Justin Trudeau, who is the CEO of all the land where his wives live. Yes, wives. In this analogy, Justin Trudeau is married not to just one wife, but to 10 of them. That's the 10 provinces. Each wife living on a different part of the farm. That's the province. On top, Justin has 3 mistresses. These are the territories not at the level of provinces, but who still need pocket money. The problem is how to satisfy 10 wives and 3 mistresses. It is hard enough to satisfy even one. So how does Prime Minister Justin Trudeau do it? In the past, several other Canadian prime ministers did okay in this game, playing it reasonably straight, all cards on the table. But not Justin Trudeau. Like his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a premier in the last century, Justin is a dictatorial, rapacious husband. Not only he orders his wives around, but he grabs much of the earnings of each and hands some of it to his preferred wife in Quebec. The rest of the money he wastes on crazy schemes like carbon tax and other woke projects. What about the hard-working wives? The hardest working is the one in Alberta. On her piece of the Canadian farm, there are lots of oil and gas wells on which she works hard. Don't tell your wife works hard too, but her business is mostly banks and insurance companies, so it is high cost and labor intensive and therefore of low margins. Danielle Smith's business in Alberta is low cost and high margin, and so it is very profitable. However, Justin Trudeau grabs most of her profit and hands it to other wives and mistresses, as well as keeping a lot for himself for fancy travel and fancy hotels. Last month, though, as I said, Danielle Smith had had enough, and she said, in effect, I know we are married, but I want a post-nup agreement to which I am entitled by law, which is true. I want my share of the family bank account called the CPP, the Canada Pension Plan. Then I'm out of here. So please send your lawyer and accountant to Calgary to talk to my lawyer and accountant on splitting up the CPP and giving me my share, which by the calculation of some consultants can be anything from a quarter to half of the entire account. And by the way, Justin, no more grab of my oil revenues by this carbon tax nonsense. If you try, I'll activate the notwithstanding clause, which is the escape clause built into Canadian Constitution meant originally to enable Quebec to have a hall pass and refuse to obey the law. That's like a US state having an exemption from obeying the US Supreme Court ruling. Can you imagine? No wonder that at this bold act of Danielle Smith, all other wives took fright because it threatened to take away money they were used to getting without working. Why, if Alberta takes her money and goes and keeps her always too, how can Quebec afford public health care? And what of the eastern maritime provinces, who besides growing potatoes and doing some fishing, rely mainly on unemployment insurance paid by, you got it, Alberta's oil? You think I'm exaggerating? Here's a proof I am not. Danielle Smith Graham Slam also threw a scare into the Supreme Court of Canada, which a few weeks ago came up with decisions that favored provinces at the expense of the feds. Why risk more provinces using the notwithstanding clause? In sum, there's now a gun on the table, Danielle Smith gun of Alberta. She just cocked it. Does the federal government have a gun too? Nope. The federal government has very little to threaten Danielle Smith with, while Alberta and the western provinces behind it have a real, credible threat. So what now? From what I'm hearing through my sleuthing, the wise old men who run Canadian Liberal Party, yes, they're almost all men, finally realized they must push Trudeau out, or the Canadian rich family farm will be subdivided into family subplots benefiting a bunch of cowboys in Alberta, wheat barons in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and loggers and hunters in British Columbia. And then, how could the Ottawa and Montreal mandarins and Supreme Court justices afford their fancy meals in the Auberge Grand-Mère restaurant in Quebec, where they all eat? So yes, the federal government must cave in. But it will take time, I am told, because political climb downs cannot happen in a day because there are too many egos involved. In fact, Justin Trudeau's situation looks quite similar, I am told, to that of President Biden in the US, where the wise old men and women of the Democratic Party try to shove him out, but he too, like Justin Trudeau, refused to leave. But Canada is not the US. The body that nominates a head of party here is much narrower and has more power, and media has little to do with it. What's the conclusion about investing? At present, Canada doesn't look too good because government takes too big a share of resources. But after the coming recession of next year, with oil back to 30 or 40 bucks a barrel, in my opinion, Canadian resource stocks, which will be far lower than here, will likely be the bargain of the century, in my opinion. I could, of course, be wrong. But what if I am not? I suggest you start sleuthing. That's all for today. Please subscribe to the channel and retweet to all your friends and followers so they'll subscribe too. And buy my books, The Sleuth Investor and The Advanced Sleuth Investor, to learn how you can do some sleuthing on your own. I'll see you next time, and meantime, thank you very much for watching.